Welcome, parents. We are happy that you are tuning in for this college selection process parent webinar. We have three panelists with us this evening. Our first panelist is Susanna. Susanna has three children who graduated from Daniel Hand High School. Susanna's kids are attending a variety of college settings, including a community college, an art school, and an out-of-state research university. Susie has three children who graduated Daniel Hand High School in 2015, 2017, and 2019. She has one who went through the recruiting process as an athlete and at an out-of-state college, one at a military academy, and another attending an out-of-state private college. And finally, Missy has two children, including a 2018 Hand graduate who is attending an in-state four-year university, and a 2021 graduate who is currently deciding on the college she will attend in the fall. As you can see, these panelists bring a wealth of information and experience to our discussion, which we hope you will find helpful as you begin these discussions with your child. So the first topic that we're going to cover tonight is deciding which colleges to tour with your child. And the first question that we'll begin with was a question posed by one of our parents on the survey that we sent out a couple of months ago. And that is, what do you do to encourage a student who says he or she is not good at anything and has no idea what they'd like to do in the future?
So I think, as a parent and as an adult who tries to help children when they're figuring out their lives and what to do next, I think kids can tend to second guess what they're good at. And so I would focus on what they're interested in, what they like, what are the things that make them feel excited to talk about, what are the things they find themselves in classes being extra interested in or wanting to read more about, and then explore options that way. I think when the high school is working like normally and non-COVID, there's opportunities for job fairs to expose kids to different things that adults do. Yeah, I mean, I think if they start talking about what they like, it can turn to what they're good at.
Also, I think as far as children who feel that they're not really good at school in particular, community colleges do offer a wide range of classes and also certificates for children who may not be able to determine what they want to get a four-year degree in, but maybe want to actually look into the job market and get a job. Also, sometimes kids just don't have the confidence that they'll be able to do college. So looking at different colleges, there are some that have a lot of services for children, particularly who have learning issues and maybe need extra help. So doing the research about the school and making sure that if your child needs help in some area, that they have the support there.
I think it's important to note too, kids shouldn't know what they're gonna do before they enter college. It's a time for exploration. And I think a lot of kids feel like they have to have it all mapped out already, but that's the beauty of college, to explore different things.
Yeah, no, I'd echo all of the things that both Susanna and Missy said. And also I would just add to keep the communication lines open. If your child is expressing that they're really unsure of themselves, or even stronger than that, that they feel unconfident and not good at anything, then just talk to them and ask them what's up, where is it coming from, and that you can explore it together.
Great answers, ladies. What approach would you recommend if a student has two very different majors that they think they are interested in, such as a creative field and an unrelated technical field? We'll start with you, Missy.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
So I think kids, again, could explore both. I think, that they can take some classes in, something that maybe is the more creative side, and then the things that are maybe more academic focused. I think it's important for kids to have some conversation with their parents about jobs afterward. You know, I think there's many amazing things that kids could study, but the ultimate goal is to be able to be independent and have, you know, a career or a job. So it's important to be practical and whimsical, I think.
For those who are interested in a more creative field, I would suggest that they actually research what specific job they're thinking of and try to talk to someone who actually does it in the day-to-day. And this may also be for a technical field, to make sure they understand what the 9 to 5 is going to be and if that's something that they really want to pursue. Also, if children are interested in 2 different majors, unfortunately, there are requirements usually when you apply for one specific major versus another. So doing the background work and making sure that, like, for instance, if you want a technical degree in some sort of engineering and you have to take calculus, is that something that you enjoy that you'll be able to achieve? Because that also may help determine or help the child determine where their strengths are.
Again, following up with agreeing with both comments, a couple of things. One is that it is possible to pursue both. Certain students would be able, especially if they plan it on the early side, to start taking classes that would allow a major and a minor or even a double major. That's not going to work for everybody. And a consideration may be that it's easier to switch from a scientific or a technical degree program, say engineering or one of the sciences, over to the humanities, but it may be more difficult to fill all the requirements and still graduate in 4 years if you're doing the reverse. But really a key for anyone who's attending college is to make sure they know how to make a pathway to earning their degree in the 4 years, because sometimes there's not all that much room for taking additional classes away from that path if you're taking a double program.
If I could just add too, because I've been doing tours more recently, a lot of the colleges have really encouraged undecided admissions, kids coming in undecided, and they have lots of exploratory curriculums freshman year. They have advisors that are specific to undecided kids. So I think it's important that parents and kids know that a predetermined major is not essential.
Next question, how do you determine if a college is a safety, a reasonable fit, or a reach for your child? Missy?
So relying on your guidance counselor to guide you, relying on Naviance, that's a good program that will help to sort of make some connections between your academic curriculum, your GPA, your SAT scores. They start to make some parallels. Also, just doing a ton of research about the schools you think you are wanting to apply to, going on tours, attending virtual information sessions.
Many schools also have admissions information on their website, or you could even contact the admissions office to find out exactly a little bit more about what type of student they tend to admit and kind of what they're looking for. Some schools, it may be more based on the curriculum the child has done, and you can ask them, well, what kind of classes should my child have taken to get into this university? And they will kind of give you a better idea. I think also that for a safety, a true safety should also be a financial safety, meaning a college that the child feels is a good fit, but is also something that they could financially afford. And that is something that the family feels comfortable with.
Good point.
Yeah, I think I just would kind of vary the question slightly and encourage everyone who's applying to college to find one school in each of those categories. I think there were really excellent suggestions for how to determine those categories from Susanna and Missy. But there's so many wonderful schools out there, and oftentimes students have an idea that the safety school is less good, or one that is just sort of a, well, all right, I'll do it. And truly, that's not the case. There are amazing programs that are out there that may not have the kind of the difficulty to get into it that other traditional schools that students see as the top shelf would have. And so finding 3 schools, one that you know pretty well you'll get into, one that you're pretty sure you'll get into, and then one that's a reach, but that you love all 3 of them. That's what I would be looking for.
I think too, getting into a school is different from sustaining successful academics for 4 years. So, you know, there's a lot of kids that go to schools that are very hard for them, and that's great. It's great to reach high, but it's got to be a school you can do for 4 years so you don't feel overwhelmed one day.
And one thing I will say, I do think admissions are changing rapidly over the last 2 years, just with a lot of test optional schools. So what that means is that many schools are no longer requiring SAT or ACT, and that does significantly increase the amount of application schools are receiving, and thus it does decrease the acceptance rate. So it may be much harder for children to even find a school that they feel is a good fit, that they feel completely safe about. So the numbers of colleges that they look at may be a little varied.
Great points. How did you and your student decide how many colleges you were going to tour?
So I love college tours. And for me, it's just a really nice opportunity to take a road trip with my kids. So, and when you're starting to explore college, you realize that all time with your children is beautiful time because they're going to be leaving. And I think, you know, we really, if our children expressed any interest in any school, we said, let's go look at it. Let's go check it out. Even it didn't matter if it was a reach or a safety or a right in the middle. We went and looked at everything we could, big, small, medium. I really believe the more they see, the easier it is for them to start narrowing down what's a good fit for them.
We started by going to look at schools that were close by within a few hours drive, but different environments. So, you know, go to Boston, look at school there, go to a smaller private school that's close by, to at least give them the sense of what type of school that they would really feel comfortable. And then after that, kind of starting to broaden the area and picking schools that they seemed to kind of fit what they were looking for. So it did vary per child about how many schools we toured, but the most important part is just to determine what type of school, you know, they want to begin with, and that can help you determine other schools to go see.
Yeah, no, that's actually really good advice that I kind of wish I had at the time. One of my children was kind of reluctant to go visit colleges. I think, I'm not exactly sure, I think she was feeling a little bit overwhelmed. So deciding and encouraging / telling her that I would bring her to the college where I work, just so she could start to take a look around and have something to compare to, even if she had no interest in going there, that was just a place to start. And just getting started with it was important. And then for how many colleges to tour, we visited enough that she had a selection to go to. I think we would have benefited with her going to more. And then with my younger daughter, she did all of the planning herself. She was just a take charge kind of person and told me when we were going to go. And then, you know, my middle was just sort of middle of the road. He, you know, we did more, we did less. It was different for all three of them.
I will say that most of the schools that we ended up touring were schools that my children decided not to apply to. And they picked more schools to apply to that they had not seen for whatever reason. But it is helpful. Some children are really reluctant, but if you can at least get them to tour, start the tour process, it may make them feel more comfortable.
That's a really good point. You know, helping them understand that touring the school can tell them that they're not interested in it and that it can narrow down the choice is a really good use of your time. So yeah, I agree.
Final question on this section is, when did you begin the researching and touring? When did you begin to research and tour colleges with your child?
I think, you know, we've always had some conversations about colleges, but it's always been colleges that the kids were more familiar with, that they see on TV, you know, sports colleges, big sports. I think when we really started to have more serious conversations was sophomore year. And then we did some visits spring of sophomore year and fall of junior year, which I'm glad we started early. I think that it gave us more time, and time just gets away from you. And with my daughter, COVID happened, so tours ceased. So thankfully we had started early. And with both my kids, they wanted to see a school, the schools that they started to take some interest in, they wanted to see more than one time. So that gave time for that too. And I think it's a different feel to tour a school as a sophomore and tour a school as an accepted student. I think it makes a big difference in their eyes. So the earlier the better.
Yeah, we began in junior year, and you know, one child was a little bit more reluctant to tour schools. I would say that for my children, probably junior year was good, and that's probably because particularly some of them decided they wanted to look at different majors between sophomore and junior year. But you know, now with Naviance and with online touring, many kids are actually going online and researching the schools themselves. And most schools now, because of COVID, will have online tours. So you may even ask them to start looking in their junior or the end of their sophomore year to kind of look at schools that they may be interested in and get them involved in the process.
Yeah, my younger children came with their older sister on some tours, and I think it actually made a difference for them. So I agree with starting early, but not in a way that's super pressure filled. Just, hey, we're nearby, why don't we walk through and check it out? And then one note, with my son who's at a military academy, that process starts pretty early. And making sure that you participate in their pre-admission offerings is pretty important to the application process in a way that it isn't for other types of schools. So that's just a note. And then for my youngest, the athlete, it worked to her advantage to be on top of that process herself. She surprised some of the coaches by having organized all of her visits herself, rather than having my husband and me be terribly involved with the process. So that's not going to work for everybody, but that came from me not really knowing what I was doing. And just having a third child who was really organized and on top of it. So those are things that worked. And then one last was with my son. He applied to some West Coast schools, and we decided that the best way to go would be that if he got in and he was seriously considering it, that we would go visit it. So that was after he had been admitted.
I had one more thought after Susie just spoke of her athlete. Another reason to start early for kids who play high school sports is you are limited. in terms of times you could go if you're playing in season. It's hard to excuse yourself from practices and games during season to go tour.
That's true. And all of those visits are really what helped her figure out for herself and make a good decision around whether she wanted D1, D2, or D3. She would have been a borderline D1, but really decided that just in terms of her the experience she was looking for, that D2 was a better match for her. And that was I think has made a big difference overall for her being happy at college.
Mhm.
Great. So we will move to our next topic, which is college tours. And for our first question, it's how did you organize your college tours? You all have talked a little bit about this, but if you could just expound upon it if you have anything else to add.
I think it started with interest and timing. And, like I said, like when one of my children is not playing a sport, we try to organize them geographically too. So like we vacation in Maryland sometimes in the summer. So when we would vacation, we would go by colleges that we might be in the vicinity of. Although, and I know I'm jumping ahead to when's the best time to tour. For me, summer is a horrible time to tour. For me and for my kids, they just have to have the students on campus to get a sense of it. But I think it was like geographic and timing mostly with the organizing. Going on formal tours.
I agree with Missy. And also look at the schools and see when they're offering tours, because some schools actually only offer tours on certain times of the year. But geographic location. And if you're going to go visit one specific school, maybe look and see what other schools are around there that your child may be interested in, and just, go there as well. Or sometimes it also helps, like if you have family members and you're going to go visit in different parts of the country and go look at schools around there. So just try and do it in groups by geography.
Yeah, I didn't do this necessarily with my kids, but I really like the idea of it, that starting locally with some schools nearby, whether those are the ones you want to apply to, is a great way to see some schools. And then one thing I did, just because of the way my job works, a few times a year I would be heading to a different conference in a different location, so DC or Chicago. And I invited each of my kids along on one of those so that we could look at a couple of schools while in between when I was, doing stuff for work. And it turned out to be a really fun experience that I had with each of my children individually. And I'd recommend that for anyone. And it also combined in some time to just sort of set them free on their own. In a place they hadn't been before. We had discussions on that as well. But it was a cool experience.
The next question, you guys have touched on a little bit, but do you have anything to add in regards to how you got the most out of your tours as you were doing them?
I think the information sessions and the guided tours are really important to do. They're selling their school, so you have to go into it, as a consumer, knowing that you're being sold a product. But I do think that the formal tours were really helpful. And also, if my children had friends or relatives who went to different schools, like walking on campuses with friends, visiting them to get sort of that inside perspective was a nice addition.
Trying to get the student involved in the tour. Sometimes you go on these tours and the only people asking the questions are the parents.
Yes.
And, trying to encourage your student to try and, ask the questions and engage with the tour guide who's a fellow student. That's an opportunity for them to find out really how the students feel about the school and what they like about the school.
Yeah, there were a few schools that encouraged my children to contact a faculty member and talk to them about certain academic programs. And I thought that was a really good addition, and not every school offered it, but I was impressed when schools did. There were others where there was a lot of time available with students who were going there. So getting an idea of what the campus life is like. Though again, it's still with a grain of salt. And then making sure that you are there at a time when students are around, I think really is an important part of the search process.
One thing I'd like to add, particularly for my daughter who was an art major, when we went to certain schools, I had forgotten about this, but she actually met with the heads of the departments of the programs she wanted to study, because her field of study was so specific that she arranged to speak to the heads of the departments when we were touring. So if you have a child who knows clearly, like they want to do neuroscience, or they want to do, a specific field, and they want to know more about that program at the school, you can also contact the head of the department and see if they will meet with your child.
That's a great idea. Did either of you have anything to add about there being a better time of year to take tours? I know Missy had expressed her opinion on this one, but.
Yeah, I mean, basically when school's end is the best time to tour.
And I think winter is a tough time too, because a lot of the kids are indoors. So I think good weather, not summer.
Gotcha. And then the final question that we have for this section of our conversation is, given COVID restrictions, how can the class of 2022 get an idea of what a campus and surrounding areas are like without an actual visit?
This is really hard. I'm living this right now because it's April and we're getting close to decision time. And there's been a couple of schools that my daughter still can't visit live. Unfortunately, I think they're going to get eliminated. I think that if it's an open campus, we talked about this earlier, if it's an open campus and you can just walk on, maybe you do that. But for those campuses that are gated and there's a lot of security around, and if you can't take a tour, I'm not sure how you do it. I mean, there's so many virtual options, which is great. The colleges are really doing a good job at that. But for us personally, it's just a personal choice. We feel we need to really walk it and live it and see the students before she can make a choice. So it's tough. It's tough to do it. Most schools are offering tours though.
If a school is not offering a tour, sometimes you can reach out to some of the students through maybe Facebook or Instagram, because I know like one of my daughter's schools, they don't have any official tours, but there are groups of students who are willing to give other children who are other children who are interested in going to that school, just a short tour,
Yeah.
so they can at least see what the school is like. It is very difficult if it is a closed campus though, but if it's an open campus, they could even try and reach out to another student and say, hey, do you have time to maybe take me around and show me the campus?
Definitely.
I know it's the only kind of frame of reference that I have is that I work on a campus in the midst of COVID, and I see every day how different the campus is compared to what it's like in more normal or safer times. And the restrictions on campus, not just for applicants, but for everybody there, are a consideration that you need to take really seriously for whether you might even postpone going to school. And I know that's a difficult topic and it's going to be different for everyone. But it has not been an easy year teaching and working on a college campus. And I work a lot with students who have done a terrific job with navigating it and taking care of each other and their classmates, but it has not been an easy experience for them.
Thank you for that. Our next topic is selecting, the actual college selection process. So the first question that we have here is, how did your student decide how many colleges to apply for?
I think both of my kids applied to quite a few. I didn't really want to limit them or restrict them too much. I mean, were pretty realistic people. They, you know, most of the colleges they applied for were within range, I guess, of, you know, sort of that mid-range, not too reachy. There was a couple reaches, but we didn't really limit them. It can get expensive. It should be noted because application fees are expensive and they add up when you're applying to, you know, 8, 10 schools. I think both of my kids applied to about 8. I just didn't want to limit them. I wanted them to have as many choices as they could have and then decide from there.
So for my children, it varied. You know, my child who went to community college, I mean, he had decided that basically at the end of junior year. I think the pressure of even thinking about college and what to do was a little overwhelming. So he had decided pretty early on, he just wanted to stay local and try community college and see how he did. You know, one of my other children applied to a school that she loved early on and had rolling admissions. So once she found out she got into that really cut down the number of schools that she applied to. So that's one thing to realize, that some schools have rolling admissions. And what that means is if you apply earlier, you're going to find out earlier. For the children who are really undecided and are looking at more competitive schools, it's going to be a larger number of schools. So, you know, one of my children applied to, you know, quite a few number of schools, and you also have to like look at the cost factor, and also just the number of schools. It gets overwhelming if you're trying to pick a large number of schools that you got into when you haven't seen half of them, you know, so try and give the child kind of a realistic picture. But the amount of schools they apply to is really going to depend on, you know, their fit and what they're looking for.
Yeah, no, it varied with all 3 of my children for different reasons. My oldest, and something that with all 3 of them was important for them to really talk about, both with us and I think also with their friends, was the fact that their reach schools are truly a crapshoot for even the very, very best students. Like there is no shoe-in for some of the top tier schools. So they one of my kids decided she was going to apply to a whole bunch of them because she really, really wanted to try to see whether she could get into one of them. And it did end up working out, which was wonderful for her, but really stressful while she was trying to complete her applications. I don't think that she did all of her applications 100% to the best of her ability. I think there were a few that just got like shoved under the door just before midnight the night it was due. But it's very difficult to manage that number of applications. And it was because she just really wanted it. My youngest, who's the athlete, the recruiting process helped her understand where she was going to apply. So that was a smaller number of schools. She still was sort of a mixed bag with the ones that she got into and the ones she got rejected from. But I think she was like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 schools. And then with my middle child, with my son, he applied, I think, in the middle range. I think he did apply to about 10 schools all over the place. And he was mixing in trying to get into to one of the military academies.
And then how did you narrow down your choices and help your child make the final selection of the college that they chose?
So we're still doing that right now for my current senior. It's been a process of elimination. I think, you know, when you have, it's nice to have good choices and it's nice to have a variety of choices, but a lot of choices can make it overwhelming because you have to make a choice. So we visit a lot. You know, we visited more than once. We look a lot at curriculums that they offer, things that are in her interest and she wants to study. My son narrowed it down. He's very practical, and so he really took into account the financial implications. You know, how much we can afford, how much he would have to take on. Those things were factors. And for my daughter too, that will be a factor. And then, you know, exploring like the different schools' accepted students' Facebook student pages and getting a sense of what the kids are like, what the activities are like. Is it a place I feel I can get educated and live at comfortably? And then they finally just make the choice. They get there. It's a process.
Sometimes it also helps if they're just deciding on a specific major to look at the different programs to see what the requirements are and what courses they're going to have to get through. Because sometimes that actually can help them say, you know, this program is really a better fit for me based on what I want to do in my career and what kind of things I'm looking at. And, you know, I do agree about the fact that, you know, finances have to be looked at. You know, also just the you know, kind of like the bang for the buck. What are you getting for what you're paying for? And does it make sense for the student and the family?
Yeah, narrowing down the choices and making the final selection. I said it earlier, keeping the communication lines open. This is a really difficult process, and it's so full of stress and anxiety for your children. It surprised me at different times what they were thinking about. And I know I didn't hear from them a lot of important things that they were trying to work through. Like I was kind of the last to know sometimes. So just asking how they're doing with it is one. And then in terms of making the final selection, with one of my kids, we did delay heading out west to schools that he had gotten into until he heard that he got in. But I brought my younger daughter with us too so that she could see them. And he knew right away that he didn't want to go to school on the West Coast once we were there. Like within 15 minutes. And my daughter, who was, I think in 8th grade, was like, no, these are my people. She was like to already go. So it was different for all of them, but helping them understand what the positives of the program can be versus some of the drawbacks. One would be graduation requirements, like the gen ed requirements. My daughter ended up at a school that had very few of them, and that was really good for her because she had a lot of freedom in choosing her academic path. My son at the military academy gets told, you know, which classes he's going to take in which program, but the leadership training that he gets is something that he was really looking for. So it was different for all of them. And then the waitlist process was the last thing. One of my children got in late off of a waitlist, and that was a nice day.
And then the last question that we have is, you know, looking back, do you think that the college your child selected was a good fit for them?
So yes, my son chose a good one. My daughter will choose a good one soon. I think it's important to note, like, we are there to be their soundboard and to keep them practical and to really be thinking about the curriculum and the finances and all of that. But at the end of the day, we have to trust our children's intuition and their gut too. They're the ones that are going to live it and breathe it. And so I've just put a lot of faith in my kids' ability to make good choices for themselves. And, you know, knock on wood, it's working out so far.
My children, I think each school they picked was a good fit, but I, you know, particularly for my art student, I did tell them and her that if she felt it wasn't really a good fit after a semester, if she decided to change majors, that it would be okay to actually transfer schools. And I think that's an important point to get across to your student, that it's okay. Some kids get to a school that they thought they love and they just don't like it. It's not for them. And many students do this. Transferring is really much more common nowadays. So, you know, even though it ended up being a good fit for her, I wanted to make sure that she knew that if she decided this wasn't for her, that we would support her in her decisions.
Yes, good point.
I definitely, all three chose something that's been a good fit for them in a lot of ways. All three have also had periods where they were having a tough time. So, it is a big transition. And heading to college means you're going to be around a whole bunch of people that you don't know, and you don't have all your established friendships there anymore. So they may not know right away whether it's a good fit or not, and making sure that you're there for them in different ways than usual, but it's still really important, so that you can determine over time and make sure that it remains a good fit when they're a little bit further away than they usually are.
Great info. And then the final slide of the evening is, looking back on your experiences, or for those of you like Missy who are still in the midst of it, is there any words of wisdom that you have for parents as they begin this process with their own children that we haven't already touched on?
You will get through it. It's very stressful. And it's stressful for us, but it's even more stressful for our children. So it's really important to be very supportive. They can be super crabby during this process. It's hard for them to be asked all the time, where are you going? What are you doing? Where are you going to go to college next year? That's all they hear as seniors. So it's an important time to just be supportive to each other.
I would say listen to them and find out really what they want out of this experience, and try and make sure they don't feel pressured that they have to live up to, certain expectations. I would also say to remember that it's they're the ones who are going through this process. And one thing that one of my daughters asked me not to do at one point, which is not to talk to other people about where she was applying. And she was having enough stress with the process itself. And I think it's important to remember that while, we as mothers or parents like to talk to other people and about what we're going through, that it's your student who's going through it. So, just respect their privacy through this process.
Yeah, absolutely good advice. I think a couple things. At one point, one of my children asked me about a gap year. And I, at the time, didn't really pay attention to that suggestion in a way that I think perhaps I should have. Things have all worked out fine, but there are many, many experiences out there that young people can go try. And if they're feeling burned out during high school, that's real. And it's important to listen to if your kids are expressing that. It may be that they just need to talk about it and they'll feel better and get right back in there and it's all set. But really listen to what they're saying, and at some point, all of them are going to hit a wall of some kind. And then the other is to just kind of keep it light. It can be really fun, and you don't have to make giant decisions every day, and just chip away at it a piece at a time and see what happens. So, yeah.
Well, thank you very much, ladies, for all of your insight and information this evening. And thank you, parents, for tuning in and watching. As always, if you have any additional questions in regards to your child and needing support in this process, you can reach out to the guidance department at Daniel Hand High School. Your student has a counselor assigned to them that can be very helpful in this process as well.